Today, church hymns are often viewed as quiet traditions designed to close out a Sunday service. But in the volatile religious landscape of the 4th century Middle East, music served a much sharper purpose. It was an aggressive weapon of ideological warfare. This map shows the contested borderlands between the Roman and Persian empires around 300 AD. Right in the middle sits Mesopotamia. Here, the early Christian church was fractured, struggling to keep its followers from splitting into rival sects. The most effective attack against Orthodox belief came from a Syrian thinker named Bardason. He openly denied the physical resurrection of the dead, but he didn't spread his ideas through dry academic lectures. He set his theology to catchy, popular melodies that people actually wanted to sing in the streets. The Orthodox Church was losing the population. Their theological arguments were sound, but they were being routed in the public square because their opponents had engineered a far more accessible, viral form of art. Ephrem the Syrian, a teacher and local deacon living in the frontline city of Nisibis, recognized the problem. He saw that logic and sermons were useless if the community was already humming the opponent's tune. To fight a viral song, he needed to write a better one. This surviving manuscript shows the ancient Syriac text of Ephrem's work. Notice the tight, rhythmic structure of the columns. Ephrem composed deeply theological, poetically brilliant lyrics, engineering his own counter-hymns, specifically designed to neutralize heretical songs point by point. His strategy worked. The originality and vivid imagery of his music captured the public's attention. Instead of passively listening to sermons, the congregation now had a literal voice to articulate and defend their beliefs, singing Ephrem's theology in the markets and in the pews. By giving the people an artistic defense, Ephrem proved that theology is incredibly fragile without accessible art. He built a cultural firewall around his community, and that ideological armor was completed just as a very real physical war arrived at their gates. These stone ruins belonged to Nisibis, Ephrem's lifelong home. In the mid-4th century, this city shifted from a spiritual battleground to a military target, sitting directly in the crosshairs of the Persian king Shapur II. This rock relief depicts the heavily armed Sasanian Persian cavalry. Shapur relentlessly attacked Nisibis, culminating in a massive, drawn-out third siege in the year 350. Unable to breach the defenses conventionally, Shapur's engineers weaponized the surrounding landscape. They diverted a river straight toward the city, sending a violent torrent of water to batter the stone walls until the masonry began to shatter. But the engineered flood backfired. As the Persian army charged into the breach, they became bogged down in the very mud and rushing water they had unleashed. Ephrem and the city's defenders seized the chaos, ambushing the trapped invaders and driving them out of the ruins. The defenders held their ground. Through sheer collective endurance, the citizens of Nisibis absorbed an engineered natural disaster and turned certain defeat into a staggering military survival. Yet, defending the walls ultimately meant nothing. 13 years after surviving the flood, the citizens of Nisibis were traded away in a bureaucratic compromise. The profile on this gold coin belongs to the Roman Emperor Jovian. After suffering a severe military defeat in 363, Jovian desperately needed a peace treaty with Shapur. To save his remaining forces, he handed over the fiercely defended city to the Persians. The treaty came with a brutal stipulation. Jovian agreed to the immediate, forced eviction of the city's entire Christian population. Ephrem was likely in his late 50s or early 60s at the time. Along with thousands of his neighbors, the aging teacher was forced to pack whatever he could carry, abandon the city he had spent his life protecting, and walk 100 miles east into exile toward the city of Edessa. After a lifetime spent guarding his community from ideological subversion and military annihilation, Ephrem was stripped of everything, left to begin again as a refugee in the desert. Ephrem settled here among the austere rock-cut caves outside Edessa. He dedicated his final years to living as an ihidaya, a solitary, celibate monk. He completely detached himself from material wealth, choosing a life of total poverty. But imperial violence soon caught up with him again. The Roman Emperor Valens, who pushed a rival theology, camped his army outside Edessa's walls. Valens delivered a clear ultimatum: submit to his doctrines, or the entire population would be massacred. Once again, Ephrem's art mobilized a city. Fortified by the very hymns he had spent his life writing, the citizens of Edessa refused to yield. They left their doors open and marched directly toward the local graveyard, signaling to the emperor that they preferred execution over submission. Faced with a population entirely unafraid to die, Valens backed down. A lone poet's lyrics had bound a community together so tightly that a heavily armed Roman emperor was forced to retreat without swinging a single sword. The final crucible of Ephrem's life arrived in 372. A devastating famine struck Edessa, causing the local social order to collapse into panic, hoarding, and complete distrust. The city actually had enough food tucked away to survive, but the wealthy hoarders refused to share it, using a cynical excuse. They claimed there was not a single honest person left in the city who could be trusted to distribute the grain fairly. Hearing this, Ephrem stepped out of his mountain isolation and volunteered himself for the job. Because he had spent decades proving his character through his art, his defense of his homeland, and his extreme vow of poverty, no one in the city could find a reason to argue. The hoarders handed him the keys. Ephrem meticulously organized a massive relief effort, ensuring that the food reached the sick and the starving. He successfully saved Edessa from starvation before passing away shortly after the harvest returned the following year. On his deathbed, Ephrem recounted a childhood vision, a vine growing from his tongue, reaching toward heaven and dropping clusters of fruit for all of creation. These clusters were his homilies. These leaves were his hymns. He had shown that enduring influence is not secured by armies, but through the union of creative power and unshakable integrity.